Dear friends, I hope you liked our story. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to press the notification bell to get updates first. I am a village girl. I was the only girl from my village whose family allowed her to study outside, as no girl in the village studied beyond the 5th grade, because there was no school beyond that. A few days before my wedding, my fiancé asked me to prove my purity. In our village, there was an ashram of a Babaji, where a small hut was built. A girl had to spend 5 days there. If she was not a virgin, she would disappear. But if she returned safely after 5 days, it meant she was pure. I pleaded with them not to subject me to this cruelty, but I was forcibly taken to the ashram and locked inside. One night, as I was sleeping in the hut, something happened that made my soul tremble. At home, the wedding preparations were in full swing, and I was very happy. My fiancé's name was Rahul, and he worked for the village landlord. Our marriage was arranged by the landlord himself, who was a very wealthy and kind man. My friends teased me by mentioning Rahul's name, but I didn't know him personally. He was the son of my father's friend. As I sat in my room, dressed as a bride, I heard the sounds of the wedding procession arriving, and my happiness grew even more. I was the most promising and educated girl in my village, the first one to pass the intermediate exam. My father was a farmer, but I had a deep passion for education. After completing the 5th grade, I couldn't continue my studies in the village because there was no school beyond that. I begged my father to let me study further, but he was completely against it. However, I was persistent. I lovingly tried to convince him, and when that didn't work, I protested by refusing to eat for days. Eventually, he gave in, but he had one condition. He would decide whom I would marry. I only wanted to study further, so I gladly accepted his condition. Since there was no school nearby, I was sent to the city where I stayed in a hostel. I used to visit my village every 15 days. Whenever I returned home, the villagers would taunt my father, saying, "You are educating her now, but one day she will bring disgrace upon you. Where will you hide your face then?" But my father ignored them because he had full faith in me. As soon as I passed my intermediate exam and returned home, my father hastily arranged my marriage. "Roshni, your wedding is in 2 weeks," he said. I was shocked, but I had promised my father that I would marry whoever he chose for me. So, I kept my word and happily agreed to the wedding without asking any questions about my groom, who he was, what he did, or even how he looked. I didn't even ask to see Rahul once. My father feared that I might refuse the marriage, so he was anxious, but seeing my willingness made him happy. He was relieved that I hadn't broken his trust. While studying in the city, I had never fallen in love with anyone, nor had I ever thought about what kind of life partner I wanted. I had only focused on my studies. That's why I was fully prepared for this marriage, for the sake of my family's happiness. I also knew that a single word from me could ruin my entire family's reputation and bring disgrace to my village. People would say, "She studied a little, and now she dares to talk back to her parents." I was very happy about my wedding, but as the day approached, my father's anxiety grew. Since the villagers had always been against my education, and because I had lived in a hostel so far away, there were all sorts of rumors about me. But my father always ignored them for my happiness. However, just before the wedding, my mother came to my room and asked me a question that left me stunned. That's when I realized why my father had been so anxious. I could never have imagined that such a question would be raised against me. Mother said, "You have lived in a city hostel for 7 years." My mother started crying and said, "You went to a big school, but tell me, did you bring disgrace to your father? Now, in front of everyone, your purity is being questioned. If anything has gone wrong, your father and I will die while still alive." I composed myself and replied, "Mother, nothing of that sort has happened. I have always stayed away from bad influences and have never done anything that would bring dishonor to our family." But my mother was not satisfied with my words, because people in the village were questioning my character. Then she said, "Rahul says that before marriage, Roshni must prove her virginity. Only then will he marry her." I was shocked. Outside, the entire family and community were seated. The wedding procession had arrived, and my would-be husband was making such absurd demands. "How can a girl prove her virginity?" I said. "Mother, how can I convince him at this moment? This is completely ridiculous." She replied, "He says that girls who stay in hostels in the city are of loose character, so he will not marry you unless you prove your purity." Then I asked my mother, "How am I supposed to prove it?" She said, "Rahul wants you to spend 5 days in the sacred room of Babaji's ashram. If you come out safe and sound after 5 days, only then will he marry you. If you are of bad character, you will disappear from that holy room because the devil will take you away. This room is inside the ashram, where many holy men have meditated for years. Whenever a girl's character is doubted, she is locked in that room. If she comes out after 5 days, she is considered pure. If she disappears, people say the devil has taken her away." Being educated, I could not believe this absurd story. How could a locked room determine a girl's character? But in my village, this was a long-standing practice. Any girl whose character was in question was locked in that room. I thought to myself, in today's modern world, how can villagers still judge a girl's purity based on such baseless and illogical beliefs? Why should I be locked up in some small room in a jungle? How could I spend 5 days there? No one knows my purity better than I do. All my relatives, my parents, and the village council were present. I said, "I refuse to accept such a thing." Hearing my words, my would-be mother-in-law got angry and said, "That means she is hiding something. Otherwise, why would she refuse? If she does not agree, we will take the wedding procession back." Hearing this, my father folded his hands before Rahul's family, pleading with them not to take the procession back. My mother came to me, crying, and said, "Why are you being stubborn? If you are pure, then why not prove it?" My parents were weeping bitterly, as if I had actually brought shame upon them. People started accusing me. Some told my father, "We warned you not to send your daughter to study in the city. Now see what has happened. Your honor is being dragged through the mud." I sat before my father, crying and pleading, "Father, I have done nothing wrong. You can even take me to a hospital for a medical examination, and the doctors will confirm everything. But please don't believe in this baseless tradition and lock innocent girls in that cursed room." But no one listened to me. My father stood lifeless like a dead body, and my mother was drowning in sorrow, as if I had truly committed some grave sin. People kept accusing me, and my refusal to go to the ashram was only strengthening their belief that I was of bad character. For them, entering the room was proof of purity. Refusing to enter meant guilt. But how could I let myself be locked in a dark room for 5 days, where no one came or went? Still, seeing my parents' tears, I felt helpless. The village council gathered and decided that I must go to the jungle and stay in that room for 5 days. They paid no heed to my words. For my parents' sake, I finally accepted their decision. I removed my bridal attire, put on simple clothes, and got ready to leave. But I was deeply disappointed that Rahul held such a backward, ignorant, and disgusting mindset. I pitied his thinking. Then, accompanied by some village elders and my father, I was taken to that small, dark room and locked inside. There was not even a single ray of light coming through. There was only one charpoy in that room, on which I lay helplessly, shedding tears. I had no idea what kind of dark world this was. Since childhood, I had witnessed this ignorant custom. In the middle of the jungle, at the corner of an ashram, there was a room where innocent girls were locked up. All the food and supplies for 5 days were kept inside, because the door was locked from the outside, and no one came before 5 days had passed. I didn't know why Rahul suspected me. The room was completely sealed, with no light to tell the time. Only a fan was running. The place was desolate, close to the jungle, where wild animals could break the door and attack me at any moment. This fear had left my heart trembling. I sat on the charpoy, but the door was made of iron, and a thin, weak girl like me couldn't possibly open it. When I lifted the cloth from the food basket, I found only a few fruits and nothing else. There was no switch for the fan and no bulb in the room. There was a bathroom, but it was pitch dark. I thoroughly searched the entire room, but I could barely see anything. Helpless, I sat back on the charpoy. Some time passed when suddenly I heard footsteps approaching. Fear gripped me. Outside, the sounds of wild animals grew louder, and as if that wasn't enough, lightning began to strike. The light couldn't enter the room, but its sounds made my heart race. Then, heavy rain started pouring down. I sat on the charpoy, crying, remembering my cousin's story. When I first became aware of things, I had seen my elder uncle's daughter's wedding being stopped in the same way. When my cousin returned from her aunt's house in another village, her fiancé accused her of proving her virginity. First, countless accusations were hurled at her. She was accused of having relations with another man. The poor girl cried, insisting she had done nothing wrong, but no one believed her. Everyone had faith in this room. They all said it was a sacred ashram that revealed the truth about pure women. I had never understood it, but my cousin was locked in that room with a padlock outside. It was said that in 5 days, proof of her virginity would be found. There was a small temple where some sages had meditated. No one in the village had ever seen them, but it was said that a great sage once lived in that hut and revealed the truth about women. The village landlord had built this ashram near the hut. After 5 days, when my cousin emerged from the room, her face had turned pale. Though she was once very beautiful, she could barely walk due to weakness. She did not utter a single word. Her wedding date was set, but a few days before the wedding, she died. At the time of her death, her face had turned completely blue. The whole village said she had consumed poison. I was only 10 years old back then, and I had been very attached to her. I cried a lot when she passed away. Now, the same was happening to me. The thought terrified me, but crying was of no use. I sat down to pray to God, hoping for help. I went to the washroom. As I was washing my hands, I noticed that there was a window inside the washroom. I was shocked. There was no window in the main room, so how could there be one in the washroom? As soon as I saw a hand reaching in from the window, I was terrified. Seeing a masculine hand at the window, I turned pale with fear. I quickly ran out and locked the washroom door. Then I began to wonder, what was happening? No one ever came near this place. How could there be a window when it looked like a solid wall? When I stepped out and locked the door, I heard someone knocking on it for a long time. My hands and feet trembled with fear. I felt like I would have a heart attack at any moment. But the washroom door was also made of iron. It wouldn't open easily. Terrified, I sat in a corner of the room. After a while, the knocking stopped. Who was it? Could it have been a wild animal? The hand I saw was hairy, almost like that of a beast. The mere thought of it sent shivers down my spine. Being in a room in the jungle, encountering dangerous animals, was not unusual. But sleep is something that eventually comes, no matter what. Crying, I didn't even realize when I drifted off. When I woke up in the morning, I recalled the events of the night and was scared all over again. The entire day passed in fear. When I felt faint from hunger, I ate some of the fruit. Then, summoning courage, I went to the washroom. To my astonishment, there was no window at all, just a wall. I was so terrified that I quickly rushed back into the room. I kept wondering, where had the window gone? A hand had come through it last night. Just then, the knocking on the door resumed. I was startled. How could anyone enter? What was happening? Who was it that came at night to bang on the door, as if trying to break it down? But the door was sturdy and wouldn't open easily. I didn't open the door or make a sound, pretending as if I wasn't there. It was my second night in that place. Every night, someone came and pounded on the door. But during the day, there was no sound. The next morning, I resolved to investigate the washroom thoroughly. As soon as the sun rose, I examined it carefully. The place where the window had appeared the previous night looked like a normal wall during the day, but upon closer inspection, I realized that it was not an actual wall. It was made of wood. I pushed it outward, but it didn't budge at first. After a while, with some effort, it finally opened. I peeked outside and saw that there was another room adjacent to mine. I stepped inside and found a tunnel leading somewhere unknown. It was pitch dark, and I was terrified. Still, I entered the tunnel through the hidden window, hoping that I might find a way to escape. I moved forward cautiously, feeling fearful. After walking a little further, I saw a light. When I reached there, I noticed a switch, and upon pressing it, the entire tunnel lit up. There was a staircase leading upwards. As I climbed the stairs and tried to open the door, it wouldn't budge. After struggling for a long time, the door finally opened. It was a room in the ashram where all the donations were kept. When I entered the room, I was stunned. I had unknowingly reached inside the ashram. There was no one present in the room. I was exhausted from the journey. I was bewildered. Why was there a tunnel from the hut to the ashram? Who had built it? The door to the room was locked, and no one could enter, since all the donations were stored there. This meant I couldn't call anyone for help. I feared that if someone saw me outside the hut, they would scold my parents and humiliate them. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, I closed the tunnel entrance and hid behind some boxes. I was terrified that they might find me, rendering all my efforts futile. As soon as I saw 3 men entering, my heart almost stopped. I remained absolutely silent, waiting for them to leave. This room contained the donations given by devotees, so only the ashram workers had access to it. I was scared and had no idea what to do next. Then, I decided to wait until nighttime to uncover the mystery of who knocked on the door at night and who the wild man was. This was my only chance to find out the truth. I couldn't escape through the door as it was locked from outside. A little while later, I saw a man. It was the landlord, accompanied by a village elder. The landlord was known to be a kind-hearted man, always helping others. He would secretly give money to the needy and even cover the expenses of girls' weddings, considering them all as his daughters. Because of his age and generosity, no girl in the village observed purdah in front of him. He was highly respected in the village, and people treated him like their guardian. I had visited his grand mansion many times, as his granddaughter was in my class, and also stayed in the hostel with me. Although she was wealthy, she never showed arrogance. Whenever I had to visit the village, she would take me along in her car and drop me off at home. If I refused, saying my father would pick me up, the landlord himself would assure me that he would inform my father. He would personally come with his driver to pick up his granddaughter and drop me home, expressing his concern to my father, who could never thank him enough. Due to my studies, I had visited his mansion with my father several times. If I ever needed notes, I would go to his granddaughter's house. But now, seeing him in the ashram room, I was puzzled. Then I thought, he built this ashram. Maybe he's just inspecting the donations. Relieved, I thought I was saved. I would tell him everything that had happened to me for the past 2 nights, and he would surely help me. But what I saw next left me shocked. He was opening the entrance to the tunnel. I remained silent and watched to understand the truth. How did he know about the tunnel? I had just been thinking he was my savior, but now the reality was different. The landlord stood by the tunnel entrance with his 2 servants. One of them dressed as the wild man, while the other opened the tunnel door. Before entering, they said, "If the girl doesn't open the door today, break it down." Hearing this, I was horrified. He was nothing less than a monster in human disguise. My heart pounded. If they didn't find me in the hut, they would realize I had escaped and was hiding in this room. If they caught me, they wouldn't spare my life. I had to escape quickly. As soon as the 3 of them entered the tunnel, I rushed out, locked the door from outside, and took the key with me. Avoiding everyone's sight, I climbed the ashram wall and jumped down. The ground was soft, so I wasn't hurt. Then, I ran as fast as I could, not knowing what my fate would be, but determined to save my honor. I also had to expose the truth about the ashram to the villagers, as their blind faith was being manipulated. I now understood what had happened to my cousin. She must have taken poison to escape this man's cruelty. I, too, was beautiful like her, and I had always respected the landlord, considering him like my grandfather. That's why I never doubted his intentions. Everything had been orchestrated by him. Since Rahul worked for him, he must have planted suspicion in his mind too. The gullible villagers were being deceived, and their beautiful daughters were being lured into the ashram. The final decision regarding my marriage also rested with the village council, which was controlled by the landlord. I was trapped in that ashram. During the day, the landlord acted as a sympathizer to the villagers, visiting their homes to see their daughters. If he liked one, he would frame her and lock her in that room to satisfy his vile desires. I had no idea where I was headed or what my fate would be, but I had run and run until I was exhausted. Suddenly, the gleam of a motorcycle caught my eye, and I was terrified. When the motorcycle stopped in front of me, I collapsed and lost consciousness. When I regained consciousness, I found myself at my uncle's house, my father's elder brother. Seeing him gave me a sense of relief. I was crying uncontrollably. He gave me water and asked, "Daughter, how did you end up there?" "You were in the ashram." He then said, "Come, I'll quietly take you back there. No one will know you ever left, and your father's honor will be preserved." But I kept crying, and trembling with fear, began telling him everything that had happened, how I escaped through the tunnel, and how the landlord had done all this to exploit me. At first, he didn't believe me, but when I told him that my sister had also suffered the same fate and had taken her own life, he broke down in tears. He realized the landlord had wronged his daughter too. She had suffered so much that she chose to end her life. "We always considered him our protector," my uncle sobbed, "but he was preying on our daughters all along." Determined to stop him, he told me to stay hidden at his house, assuring me that he would expose the truth and ensure the safety of the village girls. After feeding me, he turned off the lights and left the room. Then he went to my father and said, "Let's go find your daughter." My father was extremely worried, and my mother insisted, "Go, bring news of our child." My father finally agreed, but my mother warned, "If anyone sees you, it will be disastrous." My uncle reassured her, "Who will see us in the darkness of the night? We will go quietly and return unnoticed." Together, they left for the ashram, sneaking in through the back door. Meanwhile, the landlord and his 2 servants were inside the hut. When my father and uncle called out for me, they remained completely silent. When I didn't respond, my father panicked. My uncle calmed him down, saying, "Maybe she is asleep." The landlord, hearing my father's voice, remained motionless, afraid of being caught. Then my uncle thought, "Why not make a scene and expose them?" He rushed into the ashram, shouting, "A demon has taken my daughter!" The commotion woke the villagers, who gathered in concern. My father cried, "My daughter is not responding. For God's sake, open the door and check on her." The villagers banged on the door. When there was no response, they broke it open, only to find a hole in the wall. The landlord had escaped through the tunnel. However, being old, he couldn't get far. The villagers spotted him in the tunnel and were shocked. "What are you doing here? Why is the wall broken?" they demanded. Seeing his servant disguised as a monster, they realized the truth. There was no demon. The landlord had been abducting girls all along. The police were called, and the entire matter was investigated. The landlord was arrested and interrogated about my whereabouts. Everyone thought he had murdered me and hidden my body. My father wept in agony, believing I was dead. At that moment, my uncle revealed the truth. I was alive and safe at his house. Everyone rushed home and saw me unharmed. They were relieved and asked me to recount everything. By then, Rahul had also arrived. He apologized for his past behavior and admitted that the landlord had poisoned his mind against me. The landlord had manipulated him into doubting my character and even convinced his parents to break the marriage proposal. Rahul deeply regretted his actions and begged for forgiveness from me and my family. The entire village then decided, no girl would ever be sent to such an ashram again. We must trust our daughters, not the words of others. More and more girls stepped forward, revealing how the landlord had victimized them. His servant would disguise himself as a monster, drugging the girls so they wouldn't know who assaulted them. Those who resisted were killed before 5 days had passed and secretly buried in the ashram. When the police searched the ashram, they uncovered many skeletons. The villagers were devastated, realizing how many daughters they had lost. The ashram was demolished so that such horrors could never happen again. Meanwhile, Rahul continued to seek forgiveness, coming to my house daily. My family forgave him, and so did I. Our wedding date was set, and we got married with great celebration. As a wedding gift, Rahul fulfilled his promise. He supported my education and helped me become a doctor. He even built a small hospital for me in the village. Now, the villagers educate their daughters freely, without restrictions. Rahul also completed his studies and became a renowned lawyer. He fought the landlord's case himself and ensured he was sentenced to prison. Dear friends, I hope you liked our story. If you did, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to press the notification bell to get updates first.